Hi people, Levi here. I want to talk a little bit about the meanings of the signs, but more in the context of what is given in Gemini Upadesha Sutras as the effects of the Svamsa falling in the signs or the Rashis, and given in Brihat Parashara Horashastra under effects of Karakamsha. So I'll be talking quite a bit about the signs, and perhaps you will find some meanings here that you haven't heard before, and this broadens your perspective. What is the Svamsa? In previous video about the meanings of the houses, I touched on the Atmakaraka. That is the planet with the highest degree in the horoscope, excluding Rahu, Ketu, and the outer planets. Atma means soul, and Karaka means producer, so it's the soul producer. In Vedic astrology, the planets are called grahas. Grahas means seizers, so they seize your mind. The Atmakaraka is the planet that is most intimately involved with your soul's maturation process in this lifetime, and it is the planet on which the whole Gemini analysis is based. You see, the planets in the horoscope represent the conscious forces of the chart, and the houses represent the unconscious aspects of the chart. So the planets are the astral forces within your consciousness, right? So it makes sense to assign a planet to your soul's maturation process because, it's grahas, it's conscious entity. And it's very valuable, and you will find it, highly accurate to look at the horoscope from this perspective, The Atmakaraka's sign placement in the Navamsha or the D9 chart is the Svamsa. Sva means self and Amsha means division. So the self division. Amsha, when used in an isolated context, so when there's no number in front of it, refers to the Navamsha. The Svamsa is the core challenge that leads to a person's well-being and happiness, and it is extremely important in determining the core character and nature of a person. The effects of the Svamsa are largely related to animals, so this may literally mean that the actual effects may have to do with an animal, but more often than not, this is going to play out on a level that the animal represents symbolically, of course. We're doing Gemini astrology here, and so we're going to use a different set of aspects called Rashi Drishti. Rashi means sign and Drishti means aspect. In Western astrology, we use Tajika-based aspects like the trine, the square, the sextile, etc. We're not going to use those aspects, nor are we going to use planetary aspects, which are based on degrees. For example, Jupiter aspects 5th, 7th, 9th place from itself, Saturn 3rd, 7th, and 10th, and Mars 4th, 7th, and 8th. We're not going to use those aspects either. We're going to use sign-based aspects. So Rashi aspects are based on direction, in fact. We're going to look at the influences to the Atmakaraka in the natal chart and the influences to the Svamsa. So, and this is going to, be determined by a Rashi aspect. So when there's gentle aspects influencing the Atmakaraka and the Svamsa, this will indicate a maturation process that is more gentle and, that goes with more ease. When there's malefics aspecting, the road will be tougher. But the soul, will mature in any case, anyhow. So what are Rashi aspects? It's very simple. Movable signs, movable signs aspect fixed signs, except the fixed sign next to it. Fixed signs aspect movable signs, except the movable sign next to it. And the dual signs aspect each other. So Aries aspects Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius. But it's not going to aspect the fixed sign next to it, which is Taurus, right? And then the fixed sign Taurus will aspect Cancer, Libra, and Capricorn, but it's not going to aspect the movable sign next to it, which is Aries, and so on. And so the dual signs aspect each other, so Pisces aspects Gemini, Virgo, and Sagittarius, and so on. So I think that is probably enough for the introduction here. So I'll be discussing the effects of the Svamsa for each sign. I also want to mention that I'm following Ernst Wilhelm's translation of Jaimini Upadesha Sutras, which I think is accurate and deep. So we'll start with the Aries sign. Spring is here, right? So talk to you soon. Thank you. So the effects of the Svamsa falling in the sign of Aries. What does Gemini have to say about this? The sutra translates as 5 cats and rats. So, occultly speaking, the number 5 has to do with a manifested duality. So this means the gods or creators' expression of good and bad in the world. So a Svamsa in Aries is all about how to handle that. It is about making the right choices. Choices that lead to inspiration, fulfillment, happiness, or trouble, pains, and frustrations. So you see, the core challenge of an Aries Svamsa is to make choices that are productive to long-term happiness, right? So we are going to look at the influences by Rashi aspect to the Svamsa. So Aries is aspected by Aquarius, Scorpio, and Leo, right? It's all fixed signs. So look at which planets are sitting there. If there's gentle planets like Venus, waxing moon, Mercury, and Jupiter, and they aspect the Svamsa, that indicates a maturation process that is going to be more gentle. When there's malefics sitting there like Rahu or Saturn, this indicates a tougher road. Gemini says 5 rats and cats. So we're also going to include mice here because in the translation this is included. Mice have to do with scrutiny, right? So this could mean taking unimportant things as important. So the tendency is to let small things come in the way of the bigger things that a person needs to accomplish. And so it is about learning to put things in the right context, to look at things from the right perspective. And sometimes Aries Svamsa people can look at things in such a way that the small things become much bigger than they really are. And this could, be an exhausting process and also very time consuming, and time is precious, right? Rats are also associated with being thieves, right? So an Aries Svamsa has to do with honesty. Honesty is a big one here also. So when badly afflicted, it could indicate a person's tendency to steal things, for example. And then Gemini says 5 rats and cats. So cats are, symbolic for purification, right? The sun is exalted in Aries, and the sun is the great purifier of the body, right? So, but in essence, this means purifying one's ego-centric attitudes and attachments and thoughts in order to become happy and fulfilled. So happiness comes when purification comes. A Svamsa in Aries needs to learn how to appreciate the good and the important things in one's life. There could be, a lack of, how should I put it, perfection with things. So they tend to neglect details. That's also possible here. Aries Svamsas are always into big projects, especially when the sun is exalted. And there tend to be, small things about them that if you don't know them are absolutely not obvious and tend to play out later on. So I think that's the most important thing that Gemini has to say about an Aries Svamsa, or the Svamsa falling in the sign of Aries. Brihad Parashara Horashastra, under the effects of Karakamsha, says, or Parashara says, when the Atmakaraka is in Aries Navamsha, fear is produced and one is wasted into despondency by the besiegement of rats and cats. A malefic joining makes this more certain. So this is all about the things we discussed, right? Now, You see, also in Brihadarashtra, it is mentioned that the malefic aspects to the Swamsha, or to the Atmakarka, I should say. So we're also going to look at the influences to the Atmakarka, because this will lay out, so this, lays out the foundation of how the effects of the Swamsha are going to play out in a person's life. Right, the Rashi chart is what is actually happening in a person's life on a concrete, physical, bodily level, we could say, right? And so we need to look at the influences to the Atmakarka too, and those will give you a good idea about how gentle or hard the road is, or how tough the road is. And you can look at the influences to the Swamsha, and then we'll come to a solid conclusion. Sometimes it's a mixed bag, and often it is. And so most people have some benefic, some malefic aspects to the Swamsha or Atmakarka. So try to look at those both, right? So because all techniques in astrology, you should take with a grain of salt. You will find sometimes it's just really dead on, but not 100% of the time, because this is not how it really works. But it can give more perspective and broaden your mind and astrology perspective, and the way you can analyze or go into a chart. Okay, so now I will just discuss or touch on some ideas associated with Aries sign. So Aries is a fire sign. It represents the east direction. It is a movable sign, a cardinal sign. It has to do with action, right? It is ruled by Mars. Mars is the general. Mars is all about action. Mars is about problem solving. Mars is about logic and strategy. Mars is a tamasic planet. Tamasic planets, they act when there's trouble, when there's problems. So we need those malefics to help us out when times get tough. And so Mars is a tamasic planet, but the sign of Aries is a rajasic sign. So rajas means mist. And so again, this has to do with making the right choices. Certain desires, because rajas is also associated with desires. Certain desires can result in certain actions, right? And this could be positive or negative. And so making the right choices that lead to fulfillment is seen from Aries also, from Gemini perspective. The color associated is blood red. This connected to a prominent body, and doing things in a big way. Aries represents the head. Forests and hills are also associated with Aries. Now, Aries is all about self-determination. It's about being adventurous, about impulsiveness, right? Action, all things that we can associate with Mars. So I think that's enough for the Aries sign and the effects of the Swamsha falling in the sign of Aries. Let's move on to Taurus. So, the effects of the Swamsha for the sign of Taurus. Gemini says, in that place, Taurus, a quadruped. So, quadruped literally means four divisions, but here it refers to a four-legged animal. Taurus symbolizes security and stability in the material world. So it indicates self-development through establishing material well-being. So, a cow or cattle in general symbolizes wealth, both on a material and spiritual level. And for example, if we look at the four yugas, which are the four ages, the Satya Yuga, which is the golden age, is represented by a four-legged cow. So the cow stands on four legs, which represents stability. In Treta Yuga, for example, the cow stands on three legs. In Dwapara Yuga on two, and in Kali Yuga on one leg. So all this represents material and spiritual well-being, financial security, and resources. So it also means providing for others, and these are all aspects of abundance, right? And see, this is the core challenge of Taurus Svamsa. It is to create material stability and security, and to provide for others without too many distractions. Often, a Taurus Svamsa is not, you know, often it's not the most ambitious or driven sign, we could say. It's more about stabilizing things. Now, there is a very strong connection between material abundance and spiritual abundance. So there's the connection between the material, physical, and the spiritual. So I think I should also mention, like Brihaparashara Horashastra mentions that the Atmakaraka in Taurus Amsha indicates pleasures and quadrupeds. So we discussed this here, right? Now, so look at the influences to the Swamsha. Taurus will aspect and will get aspected by the movable signs of Cancer, Libra, and Capricorn, right? So look at which planets are sitting there. If there's benefics or gentle planets aspecting, this will indicate a maturation process that is more gentle. And when there's cruel planets aspecting, especially in bad dignity, this is indicative of a tougher road. And so remember, the Swamsha is the window we see the world through, right? And it's going to determine largely our happiness, our feeling of being happy. Now, some general ideas about the Taurus sign. Taurus is an earth sign. It is, associated with the south direction. It's a Sudra sign. It means it's a laborer, so it's about service. It's a fixed sign, so it's fixed on its course. That's why it's associated with can be be stubborn, right? So it's a Rajasic sign. It's ruled by a Rajasic planet Venus. Rajas means mist, right? So Venus gets into concrete experiences of the sign that are desirable. And so Rajas is associated with this. The color white is associated with Taurus. Also, it is long-bodied. It represents the face and the throat. It's associated with farms and villages. So, Taurus being ruled by Venus. Venus is also a very practical planet, right? It's about beauty. It's about, the moon is exalted there, it's fixed, it's stable. So relationships also tend to stabilize in the sign of Taurus, especially when there's, gentle influences to it. So I think that's, the most important thing I had to say here about the effects of the Swamsha falling in Taurus sign, and some general ideas about the sign of Taurus. Let's move on to the sign of Gemini. So the effects of the Swamsha falling in Gemini. Gemini says, in Gemini, itches and stoutness, density. So itches are symbolic for mental concepts and ideas that miss the truth. Ideas that don't find realization. And this results in irritation, like skin disorders and allergies, for example, when afflicted. So there is a need to free oneself from mental concepts that give the idea of what should or shouldn't be. See, Mercury rules Gemini, right? And Mercury is closely associated with Vishnu. And Vishnu is the preserver of all things. It is the preserver of, it is the Lord of manifestation. And Vishnu in Western astrology is Neptune, right? And Neptune points to the truth, right? Neptune is our divine consciousness. You know, that's a big thing, right? Divine, when we say divine consciousness. So this points to the truth that there is no separate existence. And that's why Neptune transits, when they're associated with personal planets, can be so tough, right? Because Vishnu dissolves things. It preserves things by dissolving things. So you eat a cow, and then there is another cow, right? That is Vishnu, because Vishnu is the Lord of all things. Now, see, for the ego, this is a very difficult thing because it's about dissolving boundaries, dissolving form, right? So I want to elaborate just a little further here. You see, the moon in astrology is a reflection of the divine spark, right? It is a reflection of our divine consciousness, which is represented by the sun. And the moon is the manas. And in the manas lives the jiva and the ahamkara. The jiva is the self, the individualized, or the individual self, I should say. And the ahamkara is the idea of separate existence. It's our ego. So the moon and Neptune and Vishnu are closely related. You know, the moon is the second planet in astrology, and Neptune is the 11th planet. So they both numerologically, you know, they're associated. They both carry the number 2. And so it's not that Neptune acts like the moon, but they're closely related, because moon is a personal planet and Neptune is a transpersonal planet. Personal planets, the personal planets are the planets that we can see with our naked eyes. Transpersonal planets we can't see with our naked eyes. You know, Pluto, Uranus, and Neptune. Now, once in a while we can see Uranus, in fact, but it's, you know, it stays very, very dim because it's so far away. Personal planets create concrete events in our life. Transpersonal planets don't create concrete events in our life. So when, you know, Neptune is not going to create a concrete event in our life, but when there's, you know, for example, a Saturn transit or a Mars transit or any transit, and Neptune is involved, then concerning that concrete event created by those personal planets, Neptune is gonna throw his Neptunian dimension over it. It's gonna, you know, make sure that the person experiences a deeper reality concerning these events. And this, you know, could play out gently or, you know, roughly, we could say, because, you know, dissolving boundaries, when we talk about this, and dissolutions, is a very hard thing for the ego to cope with, right? And, you know, if we look at the moon and emotions, and they say the moon is lovesick, right? So it's also all-knowing. It has the same quality, this Neptunian quality, but they work on a completely different level. I just wanted to explain this for just a moment. So Vishnu points to the truth of that there is no separate existence. So Svamsa in Gemini will need to learn, or will be a big lesson about just that. That's a big thing. Of course, that's for everyone, right? But all signs are, you know, applying to everyone. Mercury is the planet that is associated with astrology, right? And Vishnu. So you see how Vishnu is working here. In astrology, we can get so caught up in mental concepts, ideas, and how things should be, right? For example, the whole tropical sidereal, zodiac question, all the Ayanamsha, all the calculations, etc. So we can feel and see that Vishnu or Neptune is working here. It is, gradually dissolving the boundaries and opening our minds, right? And that is what astrology is all about. It's about opening up perspective to get out of patterns in which we are stuck and free ourselves from that. Okay, so a Svamsa Gemini is, has a great potential to learn and to deepen their knowledge about this, and to learn, to learn how to put things in perspective, let's say, concerning all this. Now, the Swamsha in Gemini has also to do with excessive ideas, having excessive ideas. And this can result in excessive eating, right? So when we eat, more than we should, or we're holding on to more than needed, right? So because Gemini mentions stoutness, right? So stoutness means there could be problems with overweight, okay? So there is the attachment to too many ideas, also trivial data, right? Because Mercury is the sign of information and communication, but there could be an excess in getting into trivial data, and what is underneath, as what is underlying, is a need to develop one's skills and talents. So that is the core challenge here for Gemini Swamsha, is that they need to develop their skills and talents in a focused way, right? They need to be focused, and they need to keep it simple. That is the challenge here. So, Gemini and, well, it's interesting to note also that, research has shown that Gemini Swamsha and even the Atmakaraka in Gemini in the Rashi chart or the natal chart tend to, percentage-wise, have more fame after death, and there's just more cases of people having fame after that, having Swamsha in Gemini, and so it's interesting, or they have, to do, or they are overly concerned with death, that too, or they are involved with things, with practices that have to do with death. And in previous video about the meanings of the houses, I talked about the third house having a death connotation because it's the eighth from the eighth house, right? The eighth house being the house of life force, and the eighth, the break of the life force, is the third house, so it has a death connotation, and I'm just associating the third sign and the third house here. I'm relating them, and so it's interesting to see that Gemini actually refers to this indirectly, and I've seen it play out in autopsists, horoscopes, morticians, and even shamans, people who conduct ceremonies, where people go through, death processes, and to leave something behind and get over, and to renew. And so I think that's quite interesting. Now, I think that's enough for what Gemini and Parashara have to say about the Swamsha, the effects of the Swamsha falling in Gemini. Now, some general ideas about Swamsha, about the sign Gemini, is that it's a Vaishya sign. It means it's a merchant sign. Mercury is the merchant, right? Makes sense. It's an air sign. Air signs have to do with, they're associated with kama. So kama is about desires and mental concepts and ideas. Gemini represents the west direction. The color green is associated with Gemini. It's Mercury. It's Mercredi. It's Wednesday, so it takes the color green. It's even-bodied. They're into long-term planning. It's a Rajasic sign. So Rajas means mist, as I mentioned before. So Rajas is one of the three gunas, which I will explain later. And Rajas has to do with passions and desires and emotions, and you can see the connotation with mist here, right? Also, the shoulders, the upper chest, and the arms are seen from Gemini, and also villages and places of gambling. So Mercury is associated with gambling. So I think that's enough for Gemini Svamsa and Atmakaraka, or Gemini sign. Let's move on to Cancer. Effects of the Swamsha falling in Cancer. Gemini says, in Cancer at a distant place, water, frigidity, leprosy, etc. And Parashara says, and in Cancer Navamsha, fear from water. So what do we got here? At a distant place has to do with foreign countries, right? It has to do with being far away from home or the birthplace, or having attachments, with foreign countries or distant places. So you can look at the Rashi aspects to the sign of Cancer in the Navamsha. That'll be Taurus, Aquarius, and Scorpio. And so look at the planets, which planets are in those signs and which planets are aspecting. Again, gentle planets indicate ease, and cruel planets indicate more trouble. And you see, more trouble means that the maturation process is going to be more work. Then we have water and the fear from water. So, this has to do with watery afflictions that are, that symbolize psychological and emotional imbalances. And these imbalances come from a feeling of emptiness, right? This can be feelings of depression, etc. And so, but underneath, there is a deep need for spiritual development, for fueling one's inner life. Cancer is a water sign, right? And water must flow, right? So when water stands still, it breeds disease, right? And water is so Cancer sign. It's important that they don't bury their feelings. And Gemini says frigidity, right? So it's important that a Cancer Samsha doesn't bury their feelings. It could indicate a person without courage, right? If the feelings don't flow, there is no natural flow. And then things like courage and strength become affected, right? So watch for that if the Swamsha Cancer is, badly afflicted, for example. But in any way, in any case, it's going to be an important topic here. So it can also indicate problems with orgasms, because when things get too cold, right, rigidity, there could be problems with orgasms. And then leprosy has to do with blood and lymph disorders. So it's important for them to cleanse, to purify the bloodstream. So, Cancer is ruled by the moon, right? And the moon is about renewal, adaptation, and emotional, personal fulfillment, right? So, Cancer is a very personal sign also. When afflicted, they can take things too personal and they can become emotionally needy. But again, below that is a need to develop spiritually and to develop the inner life. So all water signs have the capacity, more than other signs, for spiritual development just because of that, right? It's a Brahman sign, right? And Brahman signs have to do with spirituality, knowledge, also deep insight. See, water, the deep waters, we say, right? So things are under the surface and they need to be expressed on an emotional level. This is very important. And, Cancer is all about the heart. So when this flows properly, then the heart comes out in, an eruptive way, right? In an eruptive manner. It can be an incredibly inspirational sign and give a lot of healing through any practice or any expression preferred, right? So I think spiritual development and is the most important thing. It is the core challenge here too. And about the distant place. So Leo is about your own territory, right? The lions live, if they have their own territory, so they stay there also. And so, the 12th house has a foreign connotation, right? So the 12th from Leo is the Cancer sign. So again, here we have, something that points to Cancer being the sign of foreign places. So I just want to mention that when you look at the Rashi aspects, the aspects to the Svamsa, when Sun aspects the Swamsha, and even the Atmakaraka, I mean, if Sun aspects Atmakaraka and Swamsha, it's a good thing because Sun is an indicator of self, right? And so it's like confirming, or it's like enforcing the path of the soul. So it's a good placement, or it's a good aspect when Sun aspects your Swamsha or the Swamsha. When Saturn aspects, it's going to be indicating more work and resistance and troubles. And Saturn is about, paying your dues, your karma. It's about the consequences and about hard work and about learning to become stronger through resistance and work, right? So for a Cancer sign, this can be kind of difficult because it is such sensitive sign, right? It's fine-tuned, yeah. So and also if Mars aspects, for example, it can mean passion, action, logic, strategy. It could mean when afflicted, aggression, too opinionated, right? Frustration, this kind of thing. If Venus aspects the sign, it's always a soothing aspect. Venus always soothes, right? And then if Mars and Venus both aspect the sign, any sign, that you're gonna experience pleasure concerning that sign. It's gonna be satisfying. That sign is gonna be satisfying. There's gonna be some nice things about that sign playing out for you. And then if, waxing moon, that is a growing aspect, right? It is nurturing, it is growing things. The waxing moon grows things on an external material level, and the waning moon has to do with your internal life. It will grow your inner possibilities, or your inner life, I should say. Then some general ideas about Cancer sign is that it is a Brahman sign, as I mentioned. It's a water sign, right? It's a moksha sign. It has to do with liberation, spirituality. It is a movable sign, so it has to do with action and initiative. It is also a sattvic sign. That's another of the gunas, right? As I mentioned in previous video. Sattva has to do with harmony and knowledge and the soul and peace, and has more this connotation. I won't go too deeply into this here, but it has these connotations. The color associated with Cancer is pale red. It represents also a bulky body. It represents the breast and the heart, and it's also associated with deep watery places. So, Cancer is a deep sign. All water signs are and have more potential than other signs for spiritual growth, right? So I think that is enough for Cancer and Svamsa. Also look at the influences to the Atmakaraka, right? It's important to look at both. Okay, on to the next, Leo. Now the effects of the Svamsa for Leo. Gemini says, remaining wild beasts of prey, one's own place remains. And Parashara says, in Leo Navamsha there is fear of wild beasts. So we all know that lions are territorial, right? And so people with a Svamsa Leo need to learn and come to grips with and learn how to be happy with where the world puts them, right? Has to do with where their feet touch the ground. See, this could be in respect to the place, residence. It could be in respect to their status, their career, right? Their position of power. It could be in respect to ambitions, right? Sometimes when afflicted, it can indicate a person that is too ambitious, right? Leo Swamsha has to do with finding dignity in all things they do, right? And we know that wild beasts, and more specifically wild cats, are symbolic for leadership, right? And that is the core challenge here for Swamsha Leo, is to become a true leader. And so when the Swamsha is afflicted, it can indicate that, abuse of leadership, or there could be, a lack of development in leadership. And it could also indicate the tendency, to follow others at one's own expense. Okay? Now, when the Swamsha or the Atmakaraka, for that matter, is positively aspected by gentle planets, planets in great dignity, malefics in exalted dignity, or Mulatrikona or own house, this indicates a maturation process concerning this that will play out more favorably, in the sense that the person will have more capacity. There will be more opportunity for developing into a loyal, consistent leader, right? A true leader. A person that is not afraid of putting, ego attachments, will of, to dominate aside, and, a true leader will step aside when needed and will act when necessary. So the sun rules Leo, and the sun is the king, right? It is the most creative planet. And the sun is all about consistency. It is all about, making sure that the kingdom gets better. And the kingdom means the world, right? It means how to make the world a better place. But before we can make the world a better place, we have to make ourselves healthy, psychologically healthy, right? We have to become less attached to the ego in order for the energy to flow, right? And in order that the energy can flow in such a way that there is no fragmentation, that there is no egocentric motivations behind it, right? Now we all have an ego, right? And the sun indicates a healthy and strong ego, but it's not, a healthy ego is never going to get in the way of true creation, of true healing, right? Of contributing to the world. See, the sun is the ruler of Leo, and the sun is numerologically connected to Uranus, and because the sun is the first planet and Uranus is the 10th planet, so they both carry the number 1. And the sun, or Uranus, acts like the sun in some respect, but they work on a completely different level. It's, the same. I talked about, the moon and Neptune being connected. Also Mars is connected to Pluto. But, moon and sun and Mars are personal planets, right? As I explained, they have to do with our concrete events in our life. And the other planets are transpersonal planets. So, Uranus has to do with our individual expression, right? It's that unique spark. It's the transformational energy. It is the force that makes us who we truly are, right? It is our sun, our true sun. It is kind of, you can look at it as a higher octave of what the sun is doing on a concrete, personal, material, physical level, we could say. And Leo sign is all about that, right? About individual expression. It's about expressing the heart and using one's will and strength and consistency to do that, right? And that is what the world needs. It is opposite the Aquarius sign, and the Aquarius sign has to do with the collective conscious, right? It has to do with becoming a humanitarian, right? But they're opposites, so in essence, they are, they carry the same or have the same root, right? Because Aquarius has to do with individuality too, but more on a collective level, on a global humanitarian level. So Leo is going to express that more individually. That's one way to look at it. So it's how to become a true leader, how to overcome one's own ego-centered, ego attachments. And see, the sun can also, when afflicted or when looked at from a personal level, right? It can have to do with ego, right? With the mind. The sun has to do with the mental aspect of our being. The sun is dry, right? The sun is not soothing necessarily like Venus and Moon. Moon are wet, and Venus are wet planets. And so sun is dry here, and sun needs to cut through the cords here of illusion, of things that keep a person in low spirit, in low energy, right? That keep the person act on the world from ego attachment. So it's kind of, for a Svamsa Leo, it's good to look at, how Saturn and Sun are placed in your horoscope. It's for everybody, but for a Svamsa Leo, it could indicate, it could be closer to the heart, and because you see Saturn and Sun are representing the human condition, right? The sun is our divine spark. It is the light of the soul. It is the soul, incarnated in this physical body, right? And Saturn is absolutely not about that. Saturn is about our complexes. It is about the things that we don't want, right? So if they influence each other, this results in control issues and ego battles. You see, reincarnation, or having the opportunity to incarnate in this material physical world, is the healing process. That is exactly what our soul needs to develop further into higher and higher realms of existence, right? And that is what the sun is about, and that is what the Leo Svamsa is about. Now, let's talk about some general ideas about or meanings about Leo sign. Is that it is a Kshatriya sign, so it is a warrior sign. So it's ruled by the sun. I mentioned warrior signs have to do with strength and developing strength and will character, right? It represents the east direction. It's a fire sign, so fire signs are connected to Dharma, and Dharma has to do with our inspirations, right? It is a Sattvic sign, and Sattvic has to do with it's one of the three gunas, has to do with our true self, our true nature, with knowledge and also inspiration, our purpose, our soul. The color, it's a fixed sign, right? So it's fixed on its, current location, we could say, in the soul cycle. It is associated with smoky white and yellow, represents mountains also, and it is large bodied. And also it represents the stomach, right? So I think that's enough for Leo. Let's move on to Virgo sign. Now the effects of the Svamsa for the sign of Virgo. Gemini says, Virgo, like Gemini, as well as small fire. And Parashara says, in Virgo Navamsha there is fear from itches, stoutness, density, and fire, digestive fire. So the explanation for Gemini Svamsa also apply here for Virgo Svamsa. Gemini had to do with stoutness, irritation, and density, right? So this was about getting too attached to ideas, mental concepts that are just not important, okay? Now Gemini says as well as small fire. So small fire refers to the digestive system, and this is symbolic for frustrations that find their root in not being able to deal with the many experiences or the many things and troubles of the world, right? And so this can result in frustrations, irritations. And so the irritation, as discussed in Gemini, for Gemini Swamsha, here become fire. They become hot, too hot, and they can, when afflicted, result in ulcers and stomach problems, intestines problems. Right. So people with a Swamsha in Virgo should watch that and cleanse their systems. To prevent this and cleanse their mental bodies, right? Venus is, we know that Venus is debilitated in Virgo, and Venus has to do with relationships, right? Venus is the karaka, or the natural indicator or producer of relationships, and it also is the, producer of the spouse for a man when he's a heterosexual. So it could indicate relationship issues or challenges concerning relationships and sexuality and irritations, right? Because you see, Venus also rules sperm, so that's another connotation here. Now, some general meanings and ideas about a Virgo sign is that it is a Sudra sign. It's a laborer sign, and laborer signs have to do with performing service. It's an earth sign. It's an Artha sign, which means it has to do with accomplishing material goals. Earth, right, represents the south direction. It's a dual sign, so the first half of a dual sign is fixed and the second half is movable of cardinal. So it's, on the one hand, it's it completes its goals and then it sets new goals, right? It's a dual, it's movable, changeable. It is a tamasic sign, and I talked about the sattva and rajas, right? And so the tamasic is the third guna. See, the guna are the essential aspects of the natural world or of creation, right? It is the underlying fundamental principles of creation. And so it goes deep, but tamas has to do with more to do with darkness and density, right, and attachment, this kind of thing. It's a very deep thing, the three gunas. I won't go too deeply into here, but the sign of Virgo is a tamasic sign. It is medium-bodied. It represents many colors, and it also represents the waist and the intestines, right? And it's also associated with pastors. Okay, so if your Svamsa falls in a Virgo sign, then definitely look for the Gemini explanation and add this to the equation here. And okay, that's enough. Let's move on to Libra sign.